The rain hammered against the windows of my kitchen that November evening, creating that particular New England rhythm that sounds like God tapping his fingers impatiently on the roof. I was supposed to be in the garage, fixing the hinge on Evan's toolbox, because God forbid my 29-year-old son fix his own toolbox. But I'd come back inside for the WD-40 I'd forgotten on the counter. That's when I heard Marla's voice, low and venomous, coming from the living room. By Christmas, he's gone. I froze. Not because I was shocked, I'd been expecting something like this for months, but because hearing it confirmed out loud hits different than suspecting it in your gut. I'm 54 years old, and I've been in the construction business since I was 17. I know the difference between a crack in the foundation you can patch and a crack that means the whole thing's coming down. This was the second kind. Are you sure Daniel will sign off on it? The voice on the other end of the phone was tinny, distant. Probably her sister, Rebecca, who'd been whispering poison in Marla's ear since the wedding 3 years ago. He doesn't have a choice, Marla said. I could picture her perfectly, perched on my couch, the one Linda and I had saved for 2 years to buy, picking at her manicured nails like some kind of praying mantis, sizing up its next meal. Evan's already started laying the groundwork. The old man's been making mistakes. Everyone's noticed. Mistakes. Right. Like the time I caught a structural error in the Riverside project that would have cost us $200,000 in repairs if it had gone unnoticed. Or when I'd reorganized the equipment rotation and cut our overhead by 15%. Those kinds of mistakes. What about Linda? The tinny voice asked. She'll follow Evan. She always does. I backed away carefully, my work boots silent on the tile floor I'd laid myself 15 years earlier. Every nail, every grout line, every carefully measured corner of this house, I'd built it with my own hands. And now my son's wife was planning to take everything I'd worked for and toss me out like yesterday's garbage. The thing is, I could have confronted her right then, could have stormed in there with righteous fury and had it out. But that's not how you win a war. That's how you lose one real quick. I learned a long time ago that the person who stays calm usually stays alive, and the person who plans ahead usually stays on top. So instead of confronting her, I went to my office, the small room off the garage that Linda calls my cave, and I pulled out a document I'd filed away 6 months ago. A contingency plan I'd put in place when I first started noticing the way Evan looked at me across the conference table at Brennan Son Construction, the way he'd started talking over me in meetings, the way Marla had started showing up to job sites, all smiles and suggestions, undermining every decision I made with a sweet voice and a calculating look. The document was simple, boring even. 3 pages of legal language that basically said if the company faced an operational emergency, equipment failure, project mismanagement, financial irregularity, operational control could temporarily revert to the senior founding member. That was me. I'd had our lawyer, Tom Henderson, draft it 2 years ago when I'd first started seeing the writing on the wall. Tom was old school, the kind of lawyer who still did handshake deals, and believed in protecting the people who'd built things from the people who just wanted to inherit them. The board had signed it, without much thought. It was just a safety measure, they'd said. Nothing would ever trigger it, just paperwork. I smiled at that paperwork now. Sometimes the best weapons are the ones nobody sees coming. I signed my name at the bottom of a blank implementation order, dated it, and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Then I went back to the kitchen, grabbed my WD-40, and headed back out into the rain to fix my son's toolbox. Because that's what good fathers do, right? Even when their sons are planning to destroy them. Linda came home an hour later, shaking rain from her dark hair and dropping her purse on the counter with the kind of heavy thump that meant she'd had a day. She worked at the county assessor's office. Nothing glamorous, but steady work with good people. She took one look at my face and stopped mid-motion, her coat still half on. What happened? Marla's on the phone in the living room, I said quietly. planning my professional execution. Linda's expression didn't change much, just a slight tightening around her eyes, a small press of her lips. Then she carefully finished taking off her coat, hung it on the hook by the door, and said, "Want me to go in there and tell her exactly where she can shove her plans?" "No." "Want me to tell Evan his wife's a conniving little snake who's been playing him like a fiddle since the day they met?" "Not yet." Linda studied me for a long moment. We'd been married long enough that she could read me like a large print book. "You've got a plan. Getting there." "Good." She opened the refrigerator and pulled out the leftovers from yesterday's pot roast. "Because I've been watching that girl operate for 3 years now, and I'm about done with it. You know what she said to me last week? Said maybe I should think about retiring early. Said maybe we should sell this house and move to one of those active adult communities. She actually used the phrase active adult, like we're geriatric. I'm 54. Exactly. Linda slammed the refrigerator door harder than necessary. And you can still outwork any man on your crew, but she's got Evan convinced you're slipping, got him convinced he's been carrying you. That stung, but I kept my face neutral. How do you know? Because I listen. And because last month, when we had dinner at their place, I heard Evan tell Ray, your own brother, by the way, who should know better, that he's been managing around Dad's limitations. Ray. Of course. My younger brother had always been jealous that I'd built the company instead of him, never mind that he'd never shown up to a single job site before noon in his entire life. He'd be all too happy to spread gossip if it made me look bad. When's Evan's birthday? I asked, suddenly. Linda blinked. December 7th. Why? Because he expects me to cook dinner for his party. All 19 relatives, full spread. You're not seriously thinking of, "Oh, I'm cooking," I said, and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Going to be a dinner they'll remember. Linda looked at me for a long moment, then slowly smiled back. Whatever you're planning, I'm in. I know. The next few weeks moved with the kind of slow precision that construction teaches you. Measure twice, cut once. Except in this case, I was measuring my son's moves and cutting off his options. Evan didn't waste time. 3 days after I'd overheard Marla's phone call, he showed up at my house during dinner. Linda and I were eating meatloaf, her recipe, which had been winning over skeptics since 1993, when Evan let himself in with the key we'd given him for emergencies. We need to talk, Dad. I looked up from my meatloaf. Sit down. Your mom made plenty. I'm not here to eat. Evan stayed standing, his arms crossed. He'd gotten that gesture from his mother, the stubborn stance that meant he'd already made up his mind about something. I'm here to set some boundaries. Linda's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Boundaries. Yeah. Evan shifted his weight. He was wearing one of those expensive button-down shirts Marla had been buying him, the kind that cost more than I used to make in a week when I was his age. Starting today, Dad, you eat your own food. Stop thinking I'm supporting some old man. The room went very quiet. Even the rain outside seemed to pause. I'm sorry, I said slowly. Did you just say I can't eat leftovers from your house anymore? That's exactly what I'm saying. You come over, you help yourself to whatever's in the fridge, you take home containers of food. It stops now. Evan. Linda's voice had gone dangerously soft. Your father built that company from nothing. He trained you. He gave you everything you have. And I've been running it for the last 5 years while he makes mistake after mistake. Do you know how much his screw-up on the Henderson site cost us? The Henderson site? I put down my fork carefully. You mean the site where I caught your error in the foundation specs? The one that would have failed inspection and cost us the entire contract? Evan's face flushed. That's not how I remember it. That's because Marla's been rewriting history in your head, son. Don't bring Marla into this. Why not? She's the one driving this bus. I stood up slowly. I'm not a tall man, 5'10" in my boots, but I've got the kind of build, that comes from 37 years of physical labor. Evan was taller, but softer. "This is about me," Evan insisted. "About my future. I can't keep carrying. Get out." The voice that said it wasn't mine. It was Linda's, and it cracked like a whip across the kitchen. Evan stared at her. "Mom, you heard me. Get out of this house, the house your father built with his own hands, and don't come back until you remember who you are and where you came from." Evan's jaw worked. For a second, I thought he might apologize, might realize what he was doing. But then his face hardened. I could see Marla's influence there, in the set of his shoulders and the cold look in his eyes, and he turned and walked out. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Linda sat very still for a moment, staring at her plate. Then she looked up at me, with eyes that were bright with tears she'd never shed in front of anyone. "He's lost, isn't he? For now. What are we going to do?" I pulled the document from my jacket pocket and laid it on the table between our plates. "We're going to remind him that actions have consequences, and we're going to make sure he never forgets it." Linda read the document slowly, her expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something like fierce satisfaction. When she looked up, she wasn't crying anymore. "When?" "December 7th, his birthday dinner. That's 3 weeks away. I know. Gives me time to set the stage properly." I picked up my fork and took another bite of meatloaf. It had gone cold, but I barely noticed. "First thing tomorrow, I'm going to have a chat with Mira in accounting, then Jake at the equipment yard. Then we're going to see exactly how well Evan can run things without his old man's experience backing him up." Linda reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry it came to this." "Me too. But sometimes you don't get to choose when the fight comes to you. You just get to choose how you fight it." "And how are you fighting it?" I smiled. "Legally, methodically, and absolutely ruthlessly." The next morning, I drove to the office early. Brennan Son Construction operated out of a low brick building on the edge of town. Nothing fancy but solid. Good bones, as they say. I'd poured the foundation myself 20 years ago, back when the company was just me, a truck, and a dream that maybe someday I could build something that would last. While you're here, hit the hype button, don't forget to subscribe and support this channel with a like. And tell us below, have you ever faced something like this? Now my son wanted to take that dream and erase me from it. Mira Kowalski was already at her desk when I arrived, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she worked through the monthly reports. Mira had been with us for 12 years, ever since her husband died, and she needed something to fill the days. She was quiet, efficient, and loyal, not to the company, but to the people who treated her with respect. That meant she was loyal to me. "Morning, Frank," she said, without looking up. "You're here early. Need to talk to you about something. Private." Now she looked up. Mira had sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. "Close the door." I did, then sat across from her desk. "I need to know the truth about the company finances. Not the pretty version Evan's been presenting to the board. The real version." Mira was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled a folder from her bottom drawer, not the filing cabinet where the official records went, but her personal drawer where she kept her lunch and hand cream. "I was wondering when you'd ask." The folder was thick. Too thick. I opened it and started reading, and with each page my jaw got tighter. "He's been moving money," Mira said quietly. "Not illegally, technically. But he's been shifting funds from equipment maintenance to pet projects. He authorized a $20,000 renovation to his office last month. New furniture, new computers, new everything. Meanwhile, we've got excavators that should have been serviced 6 months ago." "What else?" "Marla's been showing up in the books, consultancy fees. She doesn't do any actual consulting, but she's pulling $3,000 a month." Since when? January. I did the math. That's $36,000. Closer to 40, actually. She got a bonus in June. Mira's voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the disgust underneath. For what? I have no idea. I flipped through more pages. Labor costs were up. Materials costs were up. Profit margins were down. How bad is it? We're not in danger of going under, if that's what you're asking. But we're not growing either. And with the way Evan's been handling the big projects, we're starting to get a reputation for being expensive and slow. The Riverside project? 6 weeks behind schedule and 20% over budget. I closed my eyes. The Riverside project was our biggest contract this year, a commercial complex that should have been a showcase job. Whose fault? Evan's. He ignored your logistics plan and tried to do it his own way. Turns out your way was faster and cheaper. Who knew? The sarcasm in Mira's voice was subtle but unmistakable. Does the board know? They know we're behind schedule. They don't know why. Evan's been spinning it as supply chain issues and contractor problems. Mira leaned back in her chair. Frank, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but there's been talk. Board meeting last month. Marla was there, first time she's ever attended, and she suggested the company might be better served with new energy in the leadership role. She suggested replacing me. She suggested promoting Evan to sole owner-operator and moving you into an advisory role, which sounds nice until you realize advisory means no authority and no real income. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not surprise, I'd known this was coming. But confirmation always hits different than suspicion. Did the board agree? They're thinking about it. Votes scheduled for January. January. After the holidays. After they thought I'd be too tired and broken down from a year of being undermined to fight back. They'd serve me papers with a nice bow and a gold watch and expect me to shuffle off into retirement without a word. They'd forgotten who taught Evan everything he knew about construction. And they'd definitely forgotten who knew where all the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking. Mira, I said slowly, what would happen if someone with operational authority suddenly froze Evan's access to company equipment? Her eyes widened. You mean that emergency clause in the bylaws? That's exactly what I mean. A slow smile spread across Mira's face. It made her look 10 years younger. It would mean every piece of equipment on every job site would require your personal authorization to move. Every excavator, every bulldozer, every dump truck. Evan couldn't do anything without your signature. And the Riverside project? He's got a major inspection scheduled for next Tuesday. He needs the excavators repositioned to demonstrate site compliance. Without them in place, he fails the inspection. If he fails the inspection, he loses the contract. Mira's smile got wider. And if he loses the contract, the board's going to have some serious questions about his leadership ability. Would that be legal? Completely. The clause exists for exactly this kind of situation, when management decisions threaten company stability. And given what I've documented here, she tapped the folder, you'd have cause. I stood up. Can you have the implementation order ready by this afternoon? Already typed it up last week, just in case. I'll have it on your desk by lunch. Mira, you're a treasure. I'm a woman who doesn't like seeing good people get screwed over by their own kids. She opened her bottom drawer again and pulled out another folder. You might also want to see this. It's a proposal Marla submitted to the board 3 weeks ago, suggested the company might want to consider acquisition offers. She wants to sell the company? Only if the price is right. And only if she and Evan are the ones who get to negotiate the terms and collect the commission. I took the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. This was worse than I'd thought. This wasn't just about pushing me out. Thank you, I said quietly. Don't thank me. Just make it hurt. I left Mira's office and drove straight to the equipment yard on the south side of town. Jake Brennan, no relation despite the shared last name, ran the yard with the kind of efficiency that comes from 20 years in the Army and another 15 in construction. He was also one of the few people who'd never bought into Evan's charm campaign. Jake was in the yard office, a prefab building that smelled like diesel fuel and coffee when I walked in. He looked up from his paperwork and grinned. "Frank, haven't seen you out here in a while. Evan's been handling all the equipment requests lately." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about." I sat down across from his metal desk. "How's Evan doing with the logistics?" Jake's grin faded. "You want the polite answer, or the real one?" "The real one." "He's a disaster. Last week he had me send the backhoe to the Riverside site when it was needed at the Lakewood job. I told him the schedule didn't work, but he insisted. Resulted in the Lakewood job sitting idle for 2 days while we reshuffled everything. Cost us labor hours and put us behind schedule. Did he take responsibility? Blamed it on me. Said I should have anticipated the conflict." Jake's jaw tightened. "I've been doing this for 15 years, Frank. I know how to schedule equipment. But Evan keeps overriding my decisions and then blaming me when things go wrong. How would you feel if I took back control of equipment allocation?" Jake sat up straighter. "I'd feel like Christmas came early. You need me to do anything? Just follow the official chain of command. Starting tomorrow, all equipment moves require my direct authorization. If Evan tries to override that, you call me immediately." "Done." Jake paused. "Is this about what I think it's about?" "Depends what you think it's about. I think Marla's been pushing Evan to force you out. And I think Evan's dumb enough to go along with it because he doesn't realize he can't actually run this company without you." "That's exactly what it's about." Jake nodded slowly. "Then you've got my support, whatever you need." I stood up and shook his hand. "Thanks, Jake, I won't forget this." "You better not. I'm getting too old to work for someone who doesn't know his ass from his elbow." I left the equipment yard feeling like pieces were starting to fall into place. Mira had the paperwork. Jake had the equipment locked down. Now I just needed to wait for Evan to make his next move and watch him realize he couldn't make any moves at all. I didn't have to wait long. The phone rang at 6:30 that evening while Linda and I were watching the news. It was Evan, and he was furious. "What the hell did you do?" I put him on speaker so Linda could hear. "You're going to need to be more specific, son. Jake won't release the excavators for tomorrow. Says he needs your authorization. What kind of game are you playing?" "No game. Just following company protocol. You know, the bylaws that have been in place since before you were born." "This is sabotage. This is proper operational management. If you need equipment, fill out a request form and submit it through proper channels. I'll review it and make a decision. I don't have time for your bureaucratic bullshit. I have an inspection on Tuesday." "Then I suggest you submit your request first thing tomorrow morning. I'll try to get to it by end of business." "Try to get to it? Dad, this is my project." "Actually," I said calmly, "it's the company's project. You're just the site manager. And as of this afternoon, I've resumed operational oversight of all major equipment allocation. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the board." "You're damn right I'm taking it up with the board. This is insane." "Looking forward to it. Have a good evening, Evan." I hung up. Linda was staring at me with something like awe. "You just torpedoed his inspection." "I just forced him to follow the same rules everyone else follows. If he'd been doing his job properly, this wouldn't be an issue. He's going to lose the Riverside contract. That depends entirely on whether he can humble himself enough to ask his old man for help. But based on that phone call, I'm guessing the answer is no." I picked up my coffee mug. And if he loses the contract, the board's going to start asking questions about his leadership ability. Questions that have answers Evan's not going to like. Linda shook her head slowly. "You're playing chess while he's playing checkers." "I've been playing chess my whole life, honey. Evan just never bothered to learn." The next morning, I went to the office early again. Sure enough, there was the equipment request form on my desk. It had been submitted at 6:15 in the morning. Clearly, Evan had been up all night stewing about the conversation. And it was filled out sloppily. Missing signatures, wrong dates, unclear justifications. I stamped it incomplete and returned it to his inbox. At 9:30, Evan stormed into my office. "Are you kidding me with this?" I looked up from my coffee. "Good morning to you, too. You rejected my equipment request. I rejected an incomplete form. Fill it out properly and I'll reconsider. I need those excavators today. Then you should have filled out the form properly the first time." I took a sip of coffee. "You know, when I was training you, I used to make you redo paperwork if it wasn't done right. Guess you forgot that lesson." Evan's hands were shaking. "This is about yesterday, about what I said about the food. This is about you not knowing how to run a company without cutting corners and expecting other people to clean up your messes." I set down my coffee. "You want to be the boss? Then be the boss. But being the boss means doing things right the first time, not throwing tantrums when someone holds you accountable. You're punishing me. I'm teaching you. There's a difference." I pulled out a fresh form and slid it across the desk. "Fill this out correctly, include proper justification for the equipment allocation, have it back to me by noon, and I'll have the excavators on site by 3. That gives you plenty of time before Tuesday's inspection. And if I don't? Then you fail your inspection and explain to the board why you lost a $300,000 contract because you were too proud to fill out a form." Evan grabbed the form and stalked out without another word. He didn't return it by noon. He didn't return it at all. I found out why later that afternoon when Mira came into my office with an interesting piece of information. "Evan called the board chairman," she said. "Demanded an emergency meeting to discuss your inappropriate interference with operations. And? Meeting scheduled for Thursday. You're required to attend." Mira's expression was carefully neutral. "Frank, you should know. Marla's planning to be there. She's prepared a presentation about operational efficiency and the need for generational transition in leadership." Generational transition. That's a nice way of saying get rid of the old guy. That's exactly what it means. Mira hesitated. "She's also submitted a formal complaint about your management style. Claims you're creating a hostile work environment." I laughed. Actually laughed. A hostile work environment. Because I asked her husband to fill out a form. She's smart, Frank. She knows how to play the game. She's going to paint you as the problem and Evan as the solution. Let her try. I pulled out the contingency document and showed it to Mira. "This gives me authority to take any action necessary to protect company operations. Everything I've done is by the book. Everything Evan's done, the cost overruns, the scheduled delays, the sloppy paperwork, that's all documented. If Marla wants to make this about competence, we can talk about competence all day." Mira read the document and smiled. "You've been planning this for a while. Since the day I realized my son was listening to his wife more than his conscience. What are you going to do?" "I'm going to go to that board meeting. I'm going to let Marla give her pretty presentation. And then I'm going to show them exactly what happens when you let someone who doesn't know the business make decisions about the business." I stood up. "And after that, I'm going to cook a birthday dinner Evan will never forget." Thursday morning arrived cold and gray. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the main conference room, the same room where I'd pitched my first major commercial project 23 years ago. Back then, the board had consisted of 3 local businessmen who'd taken a chance on a guy with more ambition than capital. Now, it was 7 people, including 2 venture capital types who'd bought in 5 years ago and looked at the company as nothing more than a line item on a spreadsheet. I arrived 15 minutes early. The board members were already there, sitting around the long table with their coffee and their tablets and their expensive watches. Evan was there too, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck. Marla sat beside him, looking like she'd stepped out of a catalog. Perfectly styled hair, perfect makeup, perfect smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Morning, everyone," I said, taking my seat. The board chairman, Robert Hendricks, nodded at me. Robert was 68, old school construction, and he'd known me since I was 25. Frank, glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it. Let's get started then. Robert looked at Evan. You called this meeting. What's this about? Evan cleared his throat. It's about my father's recent actions interfering with company operations, specifically his decision to block critical equipment allocation that put a major project at risk. I didn't block anything, I said calmly. I asked for proper paperwork. You rejected a legitimate equipment request. I rejected an incomplete form that was missing required information and signatures. When you're ready to submit a proper request, I'm happy to review it. Marla leaned forward. May I speak? Robert nodded. Thank you. Marla opened her tablet and projected a slideshow onto the screen at the front of the room. The title read, Operational Efficiency and Leadership Transition. Gentlemen, what we're dealing with here is a pattern of behavior that's damaging the company's ability to compete in a modern market. Frank's management style, while effective in the past, has become increasingly rigid and unresponsive to the needs of contemporary project management. I watched her presentation with something like admiration. She was good, really good. She had charts showing project timelines, cost analyses, efficiency metrics. She made it look like every problem the company had faced in the last 2 years was directly attributable to my outdated methods and resistance to innovation. She even had testimonials from contractors who'd supposedly complained about working with me. Never mind that I'd never worked with half of them. Evan had handled those projects. But the way Marla presented it, every complaint was laid at my feet. When she finished, she looked around the table with that perfect smile. The solution is simple. Evan has demonstrated strong leadership potential and a clear vision for the company's future. What he needs is the authority to execute that vision without interference from outdated management practices. I propose we officially transition primary operational control to Evan, with Frank remaining in an advisory capacity. Advisory capacity, there it was. The nice way of saying I'd be stripped of all real power, but kept around to maintain the illusion of family leadership. Robert looked at me. Frank, you want to respond? I do. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I didn't have a slideshow. I didn't need one. Everything Marla just presented sounds very professional and very modern. It's also mostly fiction. Evan started to stand. Dad, sit down, Evan. My voice was quiet but hard. He sat. Let's talk about the Riverside project, the one that's 6 weeks behind schedule and 20% over budget. Marla's presentation blamed that on my rigid management style. Want to know the truth? I created a logistics plan for that project that would have brought it in under budget and ahead of schedule. Evan rejected that plan because he thought he could do better. He couldn't. And when things started going wrong, instead of coming to me for help, he blamed supply chain issues and contractor problems. You can verify all of this with Jake at the equipment yard. I pulled out my own folder, the one Mira had given me, and dropped it on the table. This contains documentation of every questionable decision Evans made in the last 6 months. Unauthorized expenditures, budget overruns, schedule delays. And before anyone says this is just an old man protecting his territory, talk to Mira in accounting. She'll confirm every number. One of the venture capital board members, a guy named Pierce who always looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, picked up the folder and started reading. His expression shifted from bored to interested to concerned. There's also the small matter of Marla's consultancy fees, I continued. $40,000 paid out over the last 10 months for consulting services. I checked with every department. Nobody can tell me what she actually consulted on. Can you, Marla? Marla's perfect smile didn't waver. I've been providing strategic guidance on operational modernization. That's not an answer. That's corporate buzzword bingo. I looked at Robert. I've got 3 decades of experience running this company. Evan's got 5 years of experience and a wife who's very good at presentations, but doesn't know the difference between a backhoe and a bulldozer. You want to hand him complete control? Fine. But when he runs this company into the ground, don't say nobody warned you. The room was very quiet. Pierce finished reading the folder, and looked at Evan. Is this accurate? 20,000 on office renovation while equipment maintenance was deferred? Evan's face had gone red. That renovation was necessary for client meetings. We've been having client meetings in the same office for 15 years, I said. It was fine. This isn't about office furniture, Marla said sharply. This is about Frank's inability to accept that times have changed. Every company needs fresh leadership eventually. Fresh leadership, sure. Incompetent leadership? That's how companies die. I looked at each board member in turn. You want to know why I took back operational control of equipment? Because Evan's been making decisions that prioritize appearance over function. He's been spending money we don't have on projects that don't matter. And when someone tries to hold him accountable, Marla calls it interference and demands that someone be pushed out. Robert rubbed his forehead. This is more complicated than I thought. It's not complicated at all, I said. You have a choice. Put operational control in the hands of someone who knows what he's doing, or put it in the hands of someone who thinks a good presentation can replace actual competence. But make no mistake, if you choose wrong, this company won't survive another 2 years. I sat back down. Marla was staring at me with barely concealed hatred. Evan looked sick. The board members were looking at each other with expressions that ranged from uncomfortable to concerned. Finally, Robert spoke. I think we need to table this discussion until we've had time to review Frank's documentation and speak with department heads. This meeting's adjourned. As people filed out, Marla stopped beside my chair. This isn't over. I know, I said quietly. But you're going to wish it was. She left without another word, Evan trailing behind her like a puppy who'd disappointed his owner. Robert stayed behind. When the room was empty except for us, he sat down beside me. You've been planning this. For months. Why didn't you come to me earlier? Because I wanted to see how far they'd go. Now I know. Marla wants me gone and the company sold. Evan's just her tool to make it happen. Robert was quiet for a long moment. I've known you for over 30 years, Frank. I've never seen you handle anything with less than complete competence. But I've also never seen you go to war with your own son. I didn't start this war, Robert. But I'm damn well going to finish it. He nodded slowly. What are you planning? You'll see. December 7th, Evan's birthday dinner. I stood up. Make sure you have your phone on. You're going to want to hear about this one. The next 2 weeks passed in a cold war. Evan avoided me at work. Marla stopped coming to the office entirely. I went about my business as usual, managing projects, reviewing budgets, making sure the company continued to operate despite the dysfunction at the top. But I was also planning. Every detail of December 7th, every word I was going to say, every move I was going to make. This wasn't just about revenge, although there was definitely an element of that. This was about teaching my son a lesson he should have learned years ago. You don't betray the people who built your life, and if you do, there are consequences. Linda helped me plan the menu. We made lists of what we'd serve, or rather, what we wouldn't serve. We laughed about it late at night in our kitchen, dark humor sustaining us through the hurt of what Evan had become. You know this is going to blow up the family, Linda said one night. The family's already blown up. We're just making it official. Ray's going to have a field day with the gossip. Let him. Ray's been waiting for me to fail since we were kids. Might as well give him something real to talk about. Linda kissed my forehead. I love you, you stubborn old man. I love you too, you stubborn old woman. December 7th arrived with the kind of crisp winter air that makes your breath fog and your nose run. Linda and I spent the morning preparing, not food but the stage. We cleared our dining room table. We set out plates and silverware. We even put out candles and a centerpiece that Linda had made from pine branches and holly. It looked perfect, like the setting for a beautiful family dinner, which made what was about to happen even better. The relatives started arriving at 4 o'clock. Ray came first, already half drunk and wearing a Christmas sweater that had seen better decades. Then came Linda's sister Margaret with her husband Tom. Then cousin Julie and her 3 kids. Then Aunt Patricia, who never stopped talking. Then more and more until the house was packed with 19 people, all expecting a feast. Evan and Marla arrived last, right at 5. Evan looked nervous. Marla looked triumphant. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than our mortgage payment and holding a bottle of expensive wine like she was bestowing a gift upon peasants. "Something smells good," Ray announced, wandering toward the kitchen. "Dinner's almost ready," I called out. "Everyone take your seats." They filed into the dining room, chattering and laughing. Linda and I stayed in the kitchen, listening to them settle around the table. I could hear Marla talking about their recent trip to the Bahamas. I could hear Evan laughing at Ray's jokes. I could hear all of them, comfortable and expectant, waiting for me to serve them. I looked at Linda. "Ready?" "Born ready." We walked out carrying trays. But instead of food, the trays held empty plates. Beautiful china plates that Linda's mother had given us for our wedding. We set them down at each place setting with careful precision. "What's this?" someone asked. "Dinner," I said. I went back to the kitchen and returned with more items. A bag of stale crackers from the back of the pantry. A jar of generic peanut butter that had been sitting in the cupboard for 6 months. A bowl of bruised apples. A package of cheap cheese slices. A 2-liter bottle of store-brand cola that had gone flat. I arranged these items in the center of the table like they were a gourmet spread. The room had gone very quiet. "Dad," Evan said slowly, "what's going on?" I pulled a piece of paper from my pocket and set it in front of Evan's plate. It was the note I'd prepared. Linda had helped me word it perfectly. "Starting today, Evan, you eat your own food." 19 pairs of eyes stared at me. Because I'd done what needed to be done. I'd protected what I'd built. And I'd done it without compromising my principles or my integrity. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. And sometimes, that's enough. 4 months after the board meeting, 7 months after I'd first overheard Marla's phone call, Marla's lawsuit finally made it to court. Tom had been right about it being garbage. The judge took one look at the documentation, listened to Tom's arguments, and dismissed the case with prejudice. Marla was ordered to pay my legal fees. She didn't take it well. According to Evan, who I now talked to occasionally in carefully neutral conversations, Marla had convinced herself she would win. She'd told everyone who would listen that I was a tyrant who'd destroyed her marriage and her future. When the judge ruled against her, it shattered whatever fantasy she'd been living in. She left town 2 weeks later. I heard she moved to Boston, got a job with some startup, and was telling people she'd been the victim of small-town nepotism and corruption. Let her. In a year, nobody would remember her except as the woman who'd tried to destroy a family business and failed. Evan continued working as a site supervisor. He was good at it, focused, detail-oriented, willing to learn. The crews respected him because he'd stopped trying to prove he was smarter than everyone else and started actually listening. Slowly, grudgingly, I started to see glimpses of the son I'd thought I was raising. The one who could build something instead of just inheriting it. But I didn't give him back his authority. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That would depend on whether he could sustain this change or if it was just temporary contrition. The company continued to grow. We landed a major commercial contract in March, the biggest one we'd had in 5 years. The board voted to give me a bonus and a raise. Pierce, the venture capital guy, actually apologized for initially supporting Evan and Marla's vision, said he'd learned the difference between a good presentation and actual competence. I didn't say I told you so. Didn't need to. By summer, life had settled into something like normal. Not the old normal. That was gone forever, broken by betrayal and rebuilt through necessity. But a new normal. One where I was firmly in control of the company. Where Evan was slowly earning back trust, where Linda and I spent our evenings on the porch, watching the sunset and counting our victories. Ray still didn't talk to me. Margaret sent occasional emails that were determinedly cheerful and avoided all mention of the family drama. Julie posted pictures of her kids with carefully neutral captions that didn't mention me at all. I didn't care. I'd learned an important lesson through all of this. The people who matter will stand with you when things get hard. Everyone else is just noise. And I had the people who mattered. Linda, who'd never wavered. Jake and Mira, who'd backed me up when it counted. Tom, who'd made sure I did everything by the book. And eventually, maybe Evan, if he could prove he'd really changed. That was enough. More than enough. Sometimes late at night, I'd think about that rainy evening in November when I'd overheard Marla's phone call, when I'd first understood the scope of the betrayal, and I'd wonder if I could have handled things differently, if there'd been another way. But then I'd remember Evan's face across the table at that board meeting, the entitlement, the arrogance, the absolute certainty that he deserved everything I'd built without having to earn it. And I'd know I'd made the right choice. Hard choice, painful choice, but right. Because some lessons can only be learned through consequences, and some betrayals can only be answered with action. I'd given Evan everything, knowledge, opportunity, a future, and he'd thrown it away because someone with a pretty face and a silver tongue convinced him he was smarter than the man who'd built everything he had. But I'd fought back. I'd won. And in winning, I'd taught my son the most important lesson I could teach. Respect isn't given. It's earned. And if you want to lead, you better damn well know what you're doing. That lesson would serve him well. Eventually. Someday. For now, I had a company to run, projects to manage, a life to live with the woman who'd stood by me through it all. And that, in the end, was the real victory. September came with cooler weather and the changing leaves that made New England famous. I was at the Riverside site, the project that had nearly failed under Evan's management, but was now finished ahead of schedule and under budget, when my phone rang. It was Robert Hendricks. "Frank, got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" "Board wants to talk about succession planning. Given everything that happened with Evan, we think it's time to have a real conversation about the company's future." Succession planning. I looked at the completed building, the one I'd saved through experience and stubbornness. "You thinking of replacing me, Robert?" "Hell no. You just proved you're the best thing this company has. But you're 55, Frank. Eventually we're going to need a transition plan. And after the disaster with Evan, we want to make sure it's done right this time." "Fair enough. When do you want to meet?" "Next week. And Frank, bring Linda. Her perspective would be valuable." I hung up and stared at the building. Succession planning. The formal acknowledgement that I wouldn't run this company forever. That eventually, someone else would sit in my chair and make the decisions I'd been making for decades. The thought should have bothered me. But instead, I felt something like relief. Because I'd built something that would last beyond me. I'd protected it when it was threatened. And now, I'd make sure the next transition happened the right way. With someone who'd earned it, not someone who just expected it. Maybe that someone would be Evan, if he continued proving himself. Maybe it would be someone else entirely. But whoever it was, they'd know they were inheriting something real. Something built on competence and hard work, and the kind of integrity that doesn't break just because things get difficult. I drove home that evening feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. Not the arrogant kind that Evan had developed, the kind that comes before a fall, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing you did the hard thing and did it right. Linda was in the kitchen when I got home, making her famous pot roast. The smell hit me as soon as I walked in, garlic and herbs and that indefinable quality that can only be described as home. "Robert called," I said. "Board wants to talk succession planning." Linda turned from the stove. "About time." "You're not worried?" "About what? That they'll replace you? Frank, after what you pulled off, they'd be insane to push you out. They're probably just trying to make sure there's a real plan in place for when you decide to retire. You know, voluntarily, in like 20 years. I laughed. "I'm 55, not 75. Exactly. You've got decades left. But having a plan is smart. Shows you learned from the disaster with Evan. Speaking of Evan, I pulled a beer from the fridge. He asked if we could have dinner. Him, us. Said he wants to try to rebuild. What did you say? I said I'd think about it. And? I was quiet for a moment, thinking about my son, about the man he'd been and the man he might become, about betrayal and consequences, and the long, hard road of earning back trust. I think maybe we're ready. Not ready to forget, but ready to start figuring out what comes next. Linda nodded. Then tell him yes, but not at his place. Here, at our table, and he brings the food. Making him work for it? Damn right I am. Linda stirred the pot roast with more force than necessary. He doesn't get to just walk back in like nothing happened. He wants forgiveness. He earns it. One dinner at a time. You're a hard woman. I'm a fair woman. There's a difference. The following Saturday, Evan came to dinner. He brought steaks he'd grilled himself, and a salad Linda had insisted on, and a pie from the bakery downtown. He was nervous. I could see it in the way he kept checking his phone and adjusting his collar. But he was trying, and for now, that was enough. We ate at the kitchen table, the same table where this whole mess had started a year ago. The conversation was careful, neutral, avoiding all the landmines of the past. We talked about work, about the new project on the east side, about the weather and the Patriots and all the safe topics that let us pretend we were a normal family having a normal dinner. It wasn't comfortable, but it wasn't hostile either. It was just tentative, like we were learning how to be around each other again. After dinner, Evan helped with the dishes. That was new. Before Marla, he'd always left the cleanup to someone else. I watched him scrub the plates with careful attention, and I wondered if this was real, or if it was just an act he'd perform until he felt secure enough to slip back into old patterns. Time would tell. It always did. As he was leaving, Evan stopped at the door. Dad, thanks for giving me another chance. I haven't given you anything yet except permission to keep working. If you want another chance, you're going to have to earn it. I know. And I will. However long it takes. He left, and Linda and I stood in the doorway watching him drive away. Think he means it? Linda asked. I think he wants to mean it. That's a start. And if he backslides? Then I deal with it. But I'm not going to spend the rest of my life waiting for him to fail. He gets this chance. What he does with it is up to him. Linda squeezed my hand. When did you get so wise? I married you, didn't I? Had to develop some wisdom just to keep up. She laughed, and we went back inside to finish cleaning up. The months continued to pass. Fall turned to winter. The anniversary of that first overhead phone call came and went without ceremony. I marked it privately. A small acknowledgement of how far we'd come and how much it had cost. But I didn't dwell on it. Couldn't afford to. There was too much work to do. Too many projects to manage. Too many people depending on me to keep the company running smoothly. And slowly, quietly, Evan continued to prove himself. He took on more responsibility without demanding more authority. He asked for advice instead of assuming he knew better. He treated the crews with respect and listened when the old-timers shared their knowledge. Maybe he'd really learned his lesson. Maybe the disaster had broken something in him that needed breaking and rebuilt it stronger. Or maybe he was just better at hiding his true nature now. I honestly didn't know, and I'd accepted that I might never know for sure. But I could live with uncertainty. After everything I'd been through, uncertainty felt manageable, comfortable even. What I couldn't live with, what I'd never accept, was being betrayed again without consequences. Because I'd learned something important through all this. You teach people how to treat you. And if you let them walk over you without pushing back, they'll keep walking until there's nothing left. I'd pushed back, hard, and in doing so, I'd drawn a line that nobody in my family would ever forget. This far and no further. That line would protect me for the rest of my life. And maybe, if Evan had really learned his lesson, it would protect him too. Because sometimes, the harshest lessons are the ones that save you from worse disasters down the road. December 7th came again. Evan's birthday. He didn't ask for a dinner party. Instead, he invited just me and Linda to a restaurant, his treat. We went, and it was fine. Quiet. Normal. The kind of dinner families have when they're trying to rebuild something that got broken. There were no dramatic revelations, no tearful apologies, no grand gestures, just three people eating food and making small talk and pretending the past year hadn't nearly destroyed them all. And maybe that was progress, real progress, not the fake kind that comes from grand gestures and empty promises. After dinner, as we were getting ready to leave, Evan said, "I'm seeing someone. Her name's Amy. She works in the county clerk's office. Normal job, normal life, no ambitions to take over anything." Linda smiled. "When do we get to meet her?" "When I'm sure she's going to stick around. Don't want to scare her off with family drama." "Smart," I said. Evan looked at me for a long moment. "I'm really trying, Dad." "I know." "Is it working?" I considered that. Considered all the months of watching him work. All the small signs that maybe he'd changed. All the careful rebuilding of something I'd thought was destroyed beyond repair. "Ask me in another year," I said finally. Evan nodded, accepting that. Fair enough. We parted ways in the parking lot. Linda and I drove home in comfortable silence, both of us thinking about the same things, but not needing to say them out loud. "He's different," Linda said finally. "Maybe. You don't believe it? I believe he's trying. Whether he can sustain it is a different question. And if he can?" I thought about that. Then maybe, eventually, we can be a family again. Different than before, but something. That would be nice. "Yeah," I said. It would. But even as I said it, I knew things would never really go back to how they were. The betrayal had left scars that would never fully heal. The things said couldn't be unsaid. The actions taken couldn't be undone. One evening in late August, I was working late in my office when there was a knock on the door. Evan stood there holding 2 cups of coffee from the expensive place downtown. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure." He came in and set one of the coffees on my desk. We drank in silence for a moment, both of us clearly gathering courage for whatever this conversation was going to be. "I talked to a therapist," Evan said finally. "About everything that happened. About Marla. About the company. About you. And she said I spent most of my 20s trying to prove I was better than you instead of trying to learn from you. Said it was classic insecurity mixed with spousal manipulation. Said Marla basically exploited my need to be seen as competent and turned it into a weapon against you." "You paying this therapist a lot of money to tell you things you already knew?" Evan smiled slightly. "Yeah, actually, but hearing it from someone objective helped. Made me realize how much damage I did. To the company, to our relationship, to myself. Where's this going, Evan? I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. All right? Is there any future for me in this company beyond site supervisor, or did I burn that bridge permanently?" I took a long drink of my coffee, buying time to think. This was the question I'd been avoiding for months, the one that would define our relationship going forward. "I don't know," I said finally. "You're doing good work now. You're reliable, competent, and you've stopped trying to prove you're smarter than everyone else. That's all progress. But trust takes time to rebuild. You betrayed me, son. Systematically and deliberately. You listened to your wife over your father. You tried to push me out of my own company. And even though I understand why it happened and I believe you're sorry, I can't just forget it. I'm not asking you to forget it. I'm asking if there's a path forward." I looked at him. Really looked at him. He'd lost weight. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago. The easy confidence that had bordered on arrogance was gone, replaced by something more genuine, more earned. Maybe, I said slowly, if you keep proving yourself, if you continue learning instead of assuming you know everything, if you can work under someone else's authority without resentment, then maybe, in 5 years or 10 years, we can talk about you taking on more responsibility. 5 or 10 years. That's how long it took me to really understand this business. Why would you need less time than I did? Evan nodded slowly. That's fair. And even then, it won't be automatic. The board will have to approve. I'll have to trust you completely, and you'll have to prove you've learned not just how to do the job, but why we do it the way we do it. I understand. Do you? Because this isn't me being vindictive or holding a grudge. This is me being realistic about what it takes to run a company like this. You don't get authority just because you want it. You get it because you've proven you can handle it. I know that now. I didn't before, but I do now. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Evan stood up. Thanks for the honesty. I'd rather know where I stand than spend years wondering. That's maturity talking. Good sign. He almost smiled. I'll take what I can get. After he left, I sat at my desk thinking about the conversation, about how far we'd come and how far we still had to go, about whether Evan would have the patience to spend another decade proving himself, or if he'd eventually get frustrated and leave to start his own company. Either option was fine with me. I'd built something secure enough to survive whether Evan stayed or left. That was the real victory, not controlling my son's future, but making sure the company's future didn't depend on him. Linda was already in bed when I got home, but she woke up when I came in. Late night. Evan and I had a talk. About? His future with the company. Linda sat up. And I told him maybe in 5 or 10 years we can talk about giving him more responsibility, if he proves himself. How'd he take it? Better than I expected. Maybe the therapy's helping. Linda studied my face in the dim light. You're never going to fully forgive him, are you? I don't know. Ask me in 10 years. Fair enough. She laid back down. Come to bed. Tomorrow's going to be another long day. She was right about that. Tomorrow would be long, and the day after that, and the day after that. But they'd be my days, lived on my terms, running a company I'd protected and secured. That was enough, more than enough. October brought cool air and turning leaves. I accepted it at a ceremony downtown with Jake and Mira and several board members in attendance. Evan wasn't there. He was on a job site 2 hours away, supervising a foundation pour. But he sent a text. Congratulations. That project was only great because you fixed my mistakes. Thank you. It was the most mature thing he'd said since this whole mess started. Maybe there was hope after all. The business continued to grow. We expanded into a neighboring county, taking on projects we would have declined 2 years ago. Our reputation was solid again. Better than solid. We were becoming known as the company that delivered quality work on time and on budget. Everything I'd fought for was working. In November, exactly 2 years after I'd overheard Marla's phone call, Linda and I went out to dinner at a nice restaurant by the coast. We ate lobster and drank wine and watched the sun set over the water. 2 years, Linda said. Feels like a lifetime. Feels like yesterday sometimes. Any regrets? I thought about that. I regret that it happened. I regret that my son tried to betray me, but I don't regret how I handled it. Good. Because you did everything right. You fought back when you needed to fight. You drew boundaries and enforced them. You protected what you built. And you did it without compromising who you are. I had help. Damn right you did. Linda raised her glass. To surviving family betrayal. To surviving, I agreed, clinking my glass against hers. We drove home along the coast road, watching the last light fade from the sky, and I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the battle, the slow, painful reconstruction of something that had been broken. I'd won. Not perfectly, not without cost, but I'd won. And that victory would define the rest of my life. Not because I'd destroyed my enemies, I hadn't, but because I'd proven to myself that I could stand up to betrayal and survive it, that I could fight back against people I loved and still maintain my integrity. That knowledge was power, real power, the kind that nobody could take away. December arrived with the first real cold snap. The holiday season brought its own challenges. Family gatherings where people still chose sides, awkward conversations about what had happened, relatives who thought I'd been too harsh and others who thought I hadn't been harsh enough. I ignored them all. Their opinions didn't matter. They hadn't been there. They hadn't lived through it. They didn't get a vote on how I'd chosen to defend what I'd built. Evan's birthday came again. This time, he hosted a small dinner at his apartment. Just him, Amy, the girlfriend who'd stuck around longer than he'd expected, me, and Linda. It was quiet, pleasant, normal, no drama, no revelations, just 4 people eating dinner and making small talk. And that somehow felt like progress, real progress, the kind that comes from accepting that some things can't be fixed completely, only managed carefully. "I'm proposing to Amy," Evan told us over dessert. "Wanted you to hear it from me first." "Congratulations," Linda said. "When?" "Christmas Eve," assuming she says yes. "She will," Linda said with certainty. "Anyone who can put up with you during this mess is in it for the long haul." Evan laughed. "That's kind of what I'm counting on." I looked at Amy, quiet, sensible, with none of Marla's manipulation or ambition. She caught my eye and smiled. "I know what I'm getting into, Mr. Brennan. Evan's told me everything, and I'm not interested in running anyone's company or scheming about anything. I just want a normal life with a good person." "Then you'll do fine," I said. After dinner, Evan walked us to our car. "Thanks for coming. I know this is still hard." "It's getting easier," I said. And it was true. Not easy, but easier. Amy's good for me. She keeps me grounded, reminds me what actually matters. "Hold on to her, then." "I plan to." Evan hesitated. "Dad? I know I said this before, but I need you to know I'm sorry for all of it, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving I'm better than who I was 2 years ago." "I know you are, and Evan, I'm rooting for you. I'm not going to make it easy, but I'm rooting for you to succeed." That's all I can ask for. We shook hands, a formal gesture that felt right. Then Linda and I drove home through the cold December night. "He's really trying," Linda said. "He is." "You proud of him?" "Getting there. Ask me after he's been married a few years and hasn't screwed it up." Linda laughed, always the skeptic. "Always the realist," I corrected. Christmas came and went without incident. Evan proposed to Amy, and she said yes. They set a wedding date for the following summer. Family members who hadn't talked to me in 2 years suddenly wanted to reconnect, probably hoping for an invitation to the wedding. I was polite but distant. Some bridges once burned don't get rebuilt, and I was okay with that. The new year brought new projects and new challenges. The company continued to thrive. Evan continued proving himself. Linda and I planned a vacation to Ireland, something we'd been talking about for years. Life, in other words, went on. And somewhere in all of that, I realized I'd stopped thinking about the betrayal constantly, stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, stopped bracing for the next disaster. I'd moved on. Really moved on. Not by forgetting what happened, but by accepting it as part of my history and refusing to let it define my future. That was the final victory. The one nobody could see but I could feel. The knowledge that I'd survived the worst thing my son could do to me and come out stronger on the other side.